She didn't say a word when they shoved her chair, when her photo hit the floor, when the whole diner pretended not to see. But 30 minutes later, 3 Marines walked in. No words, no warnings, just a silence that said, "You don't leave one of your own behind." If you believe quiet strength deserves loud respect, comment respect like this video, and subscribe for more true stories that honor our heroes. The morning haze hung low over the sleepy town of Millridge, Texas, a one-stoplight kind of place, where time seemed to slow with the rising sun. Inside a humble roadside diner, the rusty fork, the clatter of coffee cups, and the murmur of small-town gossip filled the air. Behind the counter, quietly wiping down tables, sat a woman most folks barely noticed. Her name was Maggie Lane, 62 years old, slim-built, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her gaze carried a weight that words couldn't hold. A faded Marine Corps tattoo peeked out from beneath her sleeve, and the steel of her wheelchair glinted under the flickering fluorescent light. Maggie didn't talk much, didn't need to. Once, years ago, she led missions through the dusty streets of Fallujah. She bore the scars, some you could see, most you couldn't. Now, she worked part-time at the diner, blending into the background. Just another quiet face among the regulars. But underneath that calm exterior was a heart that had seen hell, and kept beating anyway. This wasn't just another morning in Millridge. This was the day Maggie Lane would remind the world exactly who she was, and who she still is. The bell over the door gave its familiar jingle as the front door creaked open. 3 men walked in leather jackets, engine grease under their fingernails, and the kind of laughter that's loud because it doesn't care who hears it. Locals called them the Red Vultures, a biker trio that roamed from bar to bar, stirring trouble like a spoon in boiling soup. They weren't criminals, just cruel in that specific, sharp-edged way some men are when they think they've got the upper hand. Maggie kept wiping down the counter, eyes low, her ears tuned. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them barked, his voice slick with mockery. "How about a smile for your customers?" She didn't answer, just moved to the next table. That didn't sit well. Another one leaned in close. "What's wrong?" "Wheels ain't got nothing to say." He reached down, gripping the handle of her chair. Before she could react, he gave it a hard shove. The chair twisted, caught the edge of a mat, and Maggie crashed to the floor with a dull thud. Dishes rattled. The diner froze. A photograph slid out of her pocket, face down on the linoleum. One of the bikers bent to grab it, turning it over. It was old, creased, and sun-bleached, but unmistakable. A squad of Marines in full gear, desert in the background, dust in the air. And there she was, standing in the center, rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes fierce. The biker scoffed and dropped the photo beside her. Cute. They laughed as they walked away, heading to a booth near the window. Nobody helped her up. Not yet. The silence in the diner wasn't just awkward, it was ashamed. Maggie slowly pulled herself up into her chair. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. She went back to work. Exactly 30 minutes later, the door chimed again. This time, it wasn't laughter that walked in. It was presence, weight. 3 men, sharply dressed in civilian clothes but built like they'd never left the Corps. They scanned the room like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Didn't say a word. They walked straight past the counter, past the regulars frozen mid-bite, and stopped right beside Maggie. One of them tall, weathered, maybe mid-50s, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You called," he said quietly. She hadn't. But someone had. Maggie looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Then, recognition. The men turned toward the bikers, who suddenly weren't so loud. One of them started to stand, but a single look from the older Marine sent him right back into his seat. Nobody raised a hand. Nobody needed to. It wasn't violence that filled the air. It was reverence, the kind that doesn't need words. The kind that comes when warriors recognize one of their own. Something had shifted, not just in the room, but in the way people were looking at Maggie now. Not with pity, with respect. And for the first time in a long while, Maggie Lane allowed herself to sit tall, not just in posture, but in purpose. This was the moment everything began to change. The red vultures didn't stay long after that. One muttered something under his breath. Another tried to act casual, tossing a few crumpled bills on the table. But their swagger was gone, drained like air from a tire. They left without finishing their food. The door shut behind them with a heavy finality. For a beat, the diner remained still. Then, something happened. A man at the corner booth, gray hair, Vietnam vet ball cap, stood up slowly. He walked over to Maggie and extended a hand. His voice was rough, but steady. "Ma'am, I should have done something earlier. I'm sorry." Maggie nodded. No blame in her eyes, just quiet understanding. One of the young waitresses, barely 20, came over next with trembling fingers and a to-go cup of tea. "For you, Ms. Maggie." "On the house." The cook poked his head out from the kitchen window, eyes rimmed with red. "You ever need anything, you just holler." And then, without anyone planning it, without a word being spoken, people began to rise from their seats, one by one. Not in protest, not in fear, in honor. A silent standing ovation for the woman they had seen every morning for years and never truly seen. Maggie didn't say much. She never did. But her eyes glistened with something deep, something sacred. It wasn't pride exactly. It was belonging. One of the Marines, the tall one, stepped forward and picked up the photograph that still lay on the floor. He dusted it off carefully, like it was gold leaf, and handed it to her. "Family," he said. She nodded, then looked out over the room, this tiny, grease-slicked diner that had always felt like a holding pattern in her life. A place to pass the time. But not anymore. The room had changed. She had changed. And for the first time in a long time, Maggie Lane felt seen, felt valued, not because of what she'd lost, but because of what she had carried. Because of who she was. A Marine. A survivor. A symbol. A week passed. The story made its way through town like wildfire. No photos, no headlines, just whispered retellings in barbershops, church halls, and around kitchen tables. And then, on a bright, breezy Saturday morning, the sign came down. The rusty fork was no more. In its place, freshly painted in bold, careful letters, Homefront Café, a place for those who served. Maggie didn't ask for it. But the owner, Tommy James, a Gulf War vet with a limp and a good heart, insisted. It's time this place stood for something more than just pancakes and bad coffee. He told her with a grin. It's time it stood for you. For all of us. The grand reopening was simple. No speeches, no parades. Just coffee, stories, and the quiet understanding between those who had walked through fire and still carried the smoke in their lungs. Photos of veterans old and young lined the walls. Not for decoration, but as witness. Faces of sacrifice. Lives of service. And in the center, framed behind the counter, was Maggie's unit photo, the same one that had fallen to the diner floor just a week before. She didn't want it up there at first. It's not just me, she said. Tommy just smiled. Exactly. People came. Some from Millridge. Some from miles away. Vets in wheelchairs. Young soldiers still wearing dog tags. Families holding folded flags in their laps. They came for coffee, but stayed for the silence. The kind that speaks volumes without saying a word. And Maggie. She never stopped working. Still poured coffee, still cleared tables. But something was different now. People looked her in the eye. And she looked back with strength, with pride. Kids began to wave at her through the window. Teenagers asked her questions about boot camp. And more than once, a stranger sat across from her just to say, Thank you. The diner had changed its name, but it was more than that. It had found its purpose, and so had she. By late autumn, the Homefront Café had become more than a place to eat. It was a place to return to. A place where stories were passed like heirlooms, where silence could be sacred, and where one woman had quietly become the heart of it all. Maggie Lane. She never claimed the spotlight, never raised her voice. But somehow, people listened when she spoke and felt steadier just knowing she was near. Veterans started making pilgrimages. Young, old, men, women. Some with scars you could see, many with ones you couldn't. They came not for glory, but for grounding. They came for Maggie. She listened to their stories, gave advice when asked. Most of the time, she just sat with them. Sometimes that was enough. They started calling her the torchbearer, not because she carried fire, but because she helped others relight theirs. One young Marine, fresh out of deployment, came in on a rainy Tuesday, his uniform still stiff from the flight home, eyes cloudy with something too heavy for his age. He didn't speak much, but Maggie invited him to sit anyway. She poured 2 mugs of coffee. No introductions, no probing questions. Just presence. They sat there for nearly an hour. When he finally left, he said, "Thank you for seeing me." Maggie only nodded. That's what we do. We see each other. And so, it became a quiet tradition. Vets who were lost came to find their footing. Soldiers in limbo found direction. Even civilians, unsure how to honor those who served, found guidance in the simple acts Maggie modeled. Respect, listening, presence. The cafe installed a small bookshelf near the front, journals and pens. On the cover of the first one were these words, "Leave a message for the next one who needs it." It filled faster than anyone expected. Maggie had once been invisible. Now, she was indispensable. Not because she wanted to be, but because she showed up again and again with strength, humility, and quiet grace. And in doing so, she lit the way for others. Winter came to Millridge with soft snow and early dusks. The Homefront Café glowed like a warm ember on the corner of Main, and Pine always open, always welcoming. Inside, the atmosphere was different now. Reverent, but not somber. Hopeful. In that quiet way survivors carry it steady. Weathered. Enduring. And Maggie Lane. She was still behind the counter most mornings, her wheelchair parked in its usual spot. Apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled up. But what she really served wasn't coffee. It was continuity. A link between the past and the present. Between those who had served and those still searching for meaning after the uniform came off. One snowy evening, a mother came in with her teenage daughter. The girl looked shy, clutching a school folder, eyes wide as she stared at Maggie. "She's writing a paper about women in the military," the mother explained. Said she didn't want to read from a book. She wanted to talk to someone real. Maggie smiled softly and gestured to the empty stool beside her. Then she's in the right place. The two of them sat and talked for nearly 2 hours. The girl scribbled notes. But more importantly, she listened. Really listened. Her questions were sharp, thoughtful, but never invasive. When they left, the girl turned and said, "I want to be like you." Maggie chuckled. "Just be brave enough to be like you. That's more than enough." Stories like that became part of the cafe's rhythm. Not events, not ceremonies, just people connecting, remembering, healing. A young vet who couldn't sleep unless the lights were on. An older man who finally shared what happened on a beach in 1968. A nurse who carried more grief than medals. They all found space, found Maggie. And something beautiful began to happen. People stopped asking what she'd done in the war. They started focusing on what she was doing now, right here, every day. Living, guiding, lifting others. She had become more than a veteran. She was a living legacy, proof that you don't have to speak loudly to leave an echo that carries for generations. The wind had softened, but the chill still lingered on that early spring morning in Millridge. Inside Homefront Café, steam curled from mugs, boots clomped in from the wet sidewalk, and the usual soft hum of conversation filled the air. But near the back, by the booth under the photo wall, sat someone new. He was young, couldn't have been more than 19, hair freshly clipped, backpack still slung across one shoulder. His hands fidgeted with the rim of a ball cap, one that still looked too clean to feel like it belonged. Maggie noticed him the moment he stepped through the door. Not because he was out of place, but because she remembered being him. Lost, untested, half wondering if he even belonged among those whose lives had already been carved by service. She rolled over slowly, placed a cup of black coffee in front of him. "No charge," she said gently. "But you've got to earn the second cup." He blinked. "How?" Maggie smiled. "By staying a while." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then he spoke. "My bus just got in. I'm reporting for basic in the morning." Maggie nodded. "You nervous?" He gave a quiet laugh. "More than I thought I'd be." She reached into her coat pocket and slid something across the table. A worn challenge coin, faded but clearly loved. "Was given to me when I first deployed," she said. "Been in a few too many deserts and too many pockets. Time it found a new one." The boy stared at it, stunned. "I can't take this," he whispered. "You already did," Maggie said. "That's how it works. Someone gave it to me when I needed to feel like I belonged. Now it's yours." In that small exchange, barely a dozen words, a torch had passed again. Not in ceremony, not in applause, but in trust. And as he pocketed the coin, his shoulders seemed to settle, just a bit, as if the weight of uncertainty had made room for something sturdier. Like legacy, like home. At Homefront Café, the coffee never runs out. And neither does the courage. The circle continues quietly, gracefully, with Maggie Lane at its center, offering presence, purpose, and the kind of strength that echoes long after the doors close for the night. Years passed. Maggie Lane's hair turned silver, her hands a little slower, but her eyes never lost their fire. On her final day at the cafe, no speeches were made, no banners hung, just a simple moment. One by one, veterans, friends, and strangers alike stood in quiet unity. No applause, no fanfare, just raised coffee mugs, held high. A silent salute to the woman who taught them that valor isn't always loud, and heroes don't always wear uniforms. Maggie smiled, nodded once, and whispered, "Carry it forward," then rolled away, leaving behind a legacy that would never fade. If Maggie's story moved you, take a moment to honor the quiet heroes in your life. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. Like this video if you believe respect should be earned and remembered. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.